And welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast. So glad that all of you are joining us for a special discipleship podcast on being a servant. And with me in studio today, I have none other than Melanie McLemore, my trusty assistant. How are you doing, Melanie?
I'm doing great. Good morning.
Yeah, you know, the thing you may not know about Melanie is that she might be my assistant, but she pretty much runs half the church, and we are so grateful for all of that. And across from her is the one and only Nicole Troup, who runs the other half of the church, and super grateful for you, Nicole. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
And then also in studio, we have the pleasure and the privilege of introducing Grayson Dzialo, who is a officer and a pastor. It's quite a unique opportunity. So thank you for serving our city and our God.
Chris, it's great to be here. No, there's no other place I'd rather be than right here on this podcast. 100%.
I appreciate that. And then if you didn't know this, we always have Cody Sparks hanging out in the production room. Cody, can you say hey to everybody out there?
Yeah, we're here.
All right, so we're talking about being a servant and what it means to have an identity as a Christian, as a servant. And usually when you talk about servanthood, people aren't usually signing up for that. And you may not know this. If you ever heard the term deacon in church world, that's the Greek word for servant. And it's an office of servant, but it still means servant in the most servant of terms. So let's just talk about this. Grayson, when you hear the word servant, or just in your church experience, what do you think about in terms of servanthood and having an identity as a servant?
When I think about it, I think that's essentially what Christianity is and what Jesus did.
Right.
I think servant leadership is a huge thing. It's what we should all strive to do as Christians, moving forward, giving of ourselves, and just kind of giving more and more of ourselves because that's what Jesus did for us.
Right. And I think one of the things that Jesus emulates, let's go think big picture, John 13, Jesus, he washes his disciples' feet in a very intimate way of service, which is sort of fascinating. And so, Nicole, when you think of, the intimacy that Jesus brought to servanthood, what is that sort of the idea of like John 13, Jesus washing the disciples' feet, and in fact saying, if I can't wash your feet, you can have no part of me. Give me some of the thoughts that come to your mind about that.
That's a really great question. I think one of the biggest things that changed for me kind of going into servant leadership is that one of my college pastors taught that if you're a leader, you're not lording it over everyone. You're actually leadership is a position of service to the people that you're leading,
right?
And I think Jesus in that specific scenario exemplifies that for us. It's a much more humble stance than I think the world the world doesn't take leadership with the stance of humility the way that Jesus does.
Right. And I think there's a real tendency to feel like, well, leadership is a positional, I've earned this, and so therefore you people better do what you're told. And Jesus really flips that. There's a couple places, Mark 10 and then Matthew 20. It's the same story told from different vantage points. But Matthew 20, when the disciples, James and John, are sort of jockeying for position and saying hey, when you come into your kingdom, James, since he's older, he could be number 2, and John, since he's younger, he could be number 3 in your kingdom. And everybody else has to be submissive to me. In fact, I will not be content until these 10 other guys are working for me. And that's essentially what they're saying, which is what the reason why the 10 disciples got indignant or angry, and they were just fired up about it. And so what Jesus, he calls them together and he says, hey, that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. And I love this. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So Melanie, when you hear that, talk to me about just sort of the vantage point of a perspective of someone that is a person that's in ministry, what that means to you specifically.
I I think, like, when I show up on Sunday morning, it's not, I mean, obviously I work here, so it's like, of course I'm here to serve, but even before I worked here, I'm here to serve coffee here at 7:30 a.m. every week to make coffee. I don't do that anymore. That's all Clarissa now. But I'm here because I want to serve the people that are here and, like, need help,
Right.
somebody to love them.
In fact, you guys weren't always on staff with us. Nicole
true.
and Melanie, you guys were serving here long before you were getting paid to be here. Like, in a sense, like, now you're paid to be here, so there's like sort of expectation, all that. But talk to me about what it was like to be a servant where you're not getting paid, you're just sort of obeying authority, and then you're saying, okay, I'm called to serve and I'm gonna do that. What sort of sprung up in your heart to say, like, I'm ready to be a part of that?
So when I started coming here, and I like made the commitment, it took me about a month to like commit to like, okay, this is my new church home.
Mm-hmm.
It felt weird to only be here for one service. Like, I
Why
don't
is
know. I don't know. I think it's just because like in my walk as a Christian, like even in high school when I became a Christian, I was in a youth group, and like I just, the youth served in children's ministry.
Yeah.
And so I started serving there originally. And like ever since then, like you go to church and you serve at church. Like that's just what you do. It's just been ingrained in my Christian life ever since I became a Christian. So it's kind of like, I don't know if this is a great way to say this, but like serving is a natural byproduct of my faith.
Yeah.
I guess. And so, when I started coming, I was like, this feels weird, like just showing up and leaving. Like, I want to be here longer.
Oh, interesting. And I like that. It's not, and there's two pieces of it. You don't serve to be saved. You serve because you are saved.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's a part of like, this is the way of who Jesus is. Now, a couple years ago, Grace and I have been on staff here for over 10 years, both of us. And at one point, we would go visit another church to listen to their staff meeting. And after Easter, like, it was like a mega church. And after this church put on like that, I mean, putting on any Easter service, everyone's wore out, the staff was wore out. And so it was a Tuesday morning meeting, and, they'd taken Monday off, and they're, kind of regrouping after Easter. And the executive pastor was encouraging everybody, hey, you guys did a great job. This was such an incredible week. We had so many people come to faith in Christ. It was just, so many people were connected. This was wonderful. And then he goes to the senior pastor. He's like, hey, senior pastor, do you have anything you want to say to encourage the team? And the senior, do you remember this?
I do. Yeah,
and the senior pastor goes, you did your job. That was it. And then he sits down, and everyone's like,
it's crickets. It's like you're like the awkward kid in the room, and you're like, what is going on?
And what he was referring to was Luke 17. And again, in pastor world, pastors know the Bible, I think, probably well enough to know about obscure passages. But most of the people there was not getting the reference.
I probably would not have been
Right. And so let me read
Yeah.
you the reference. This will blow your mind. Luke 17, I think starts verse 7. Will any of you who has a servant plowing or keeping sheep say to him when he has come in from the field, come at once and recline at table? Will he not rather say to him, prepare supper for me and dress properly and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterward you'll eat and drink? Does he thank the servant because he did what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were commanded, say, we are unworthy servants. We've only done what was our duty. In other words, you did your job. And I think there's a tendency, and I although I wouldn't, probably only Jesus can get away with saying you did your job. But I do think there's a tendency in us to sort of over-glorify servanthood. And what I mean by that is like, why isn't anybody doesn't everyone recognize what I've been doing around here? And then the big question is, who were you doing it for?
Yeah.
And so in leadership, again, I don't know if it was a good move as a senior pastor to kind of tell your staff of over 150 people, that just killed themselves. I'm not going to say anything positive. You did your job. But I do think we need to recognize that ministry, whether you're paid or not paid, is a privilege. Grayson, do you want to speak into like ministry being a privilege?
Yeah, it's a get to, not a have to, right? We get to serve, we get to emulate Jesus, we get to have a relationship with Christ and God through Jesus, and so it's like this it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to show people Jesus through your actions and not even just your words. I think when you can serve and not go and tell everybody about it, I think our tendency is to serve and then casually try to tell everybody what we just did.
Hey, pray for me. I have a million things for the church I'm doing.
Absolutely. Like, hey, it's really hard. I've just been serving at the church so much, or hey, I just did this. We tend, I think, as humans, just want to get the recognition that you're saying. And so I think when you can serve and you can kind of do it quietly and humbly and not get recognition for it, all the more power to you. And I think God even, I know in my life, just blesses when you do that, when you serve unselfishly.
So let's talk about some barriers, because I feel like this is the part where people struggle. And what would you say are some of the barriers to people serving?
Sorry. I think, so for me, this is a big one, right? I'm a prideful person. I think pride is a huge one.
Oh, good.
Okay.
So pride, I think, would be one of the top ones for me, is just, am I too good to do X, Y, Z, whatever it is, fill in the blank. A couple years ago, I guess I won't say who asked me to do this, but a guy, we were in here on Sunday morning, okay, and a guy came out of the bathroom, and I'm typically in the back, kind of observing and kind of walking around all the time, and he comes straight over to me. I'm like, okay, he needs something, obviously. He's like, hey, I just went to the bathroom's clogged. And so I looked at him, and I'm like, thinking to myself, I'm like, cool, man. Unclog it. I'm like, what do you want me to do? Right. I'm the executive pastor of the church. Right. Why are you talking to me? And I was like, oh, I'm over facilities. Okay. I didn't say that. I didn't say go unclog the toilet. I go, oh, no problem. I'll take care of that. So I went into the bathroom. I saw the business there. And this is me trying to get recognition for my servant stuff, because I don't think anybody really knows about this. So now everybody does. Yes, I've accomplished it. But no, I go in there, unclog the stuff, and went on my way. But in my mind, I struggled with it.
Right.
Like in my mind, after I did it, I came out and it wasn't like, I just unclogged somebody else's toilet. That was so awesome of me. And I'm just gonna. No, I was actually frustrated by it.
Yeah.
Like, man, this is not why I got into the church world, being a pastor, unclogging toilets, and just different things like that. This is what I have surmounted to, in my life.
Right. I think that's such a huge point, Gray. What I love that you brought up is just this reality. It's like, don't we have people for that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm the people. Right. I think that there's a because we live in a culture of customer service, right? And so I feel like we want to hire that out, pay that out. And so we wouldn't want to ask anyone to do anything that they wouldn't be paid for. And I think what you forget sometimes is that the privilege of doing ministry is just a privilege. And I think sometimes we're, again, first world problems. Don't you understand what I'm valued? And I think when you start talking like that, you're no longer working for the King of Kings, you're working for you. One of my favorite stories, it's a parable that Elizabeth Elliot made up. And it's, it's a made up story, but she goes, Jesus one day was hanging out with the disciples, and Jesus goes, he kind of says something cryptic and profound. He goes, hey, I want you to carry a stone for me. And all the disciples are like, all right. So they all pick up stones, and Peter, he's like, I know how this works. He picks up the hugest stone he can. He puts it on his shoulder, and he's like, ah! And he's like, all right, follow me. And so Peter's like, and he follows Jesus to the next town. And then Jesus goes, okay, I want you guys to take your stones and throw them in the water. And then all the guys, they chuck their stones in the water, and Peter goes, and he throws the stone into the water. And then he's like, okay, what's the big reward? And then Jesus looks at everybody, he's like, I want you to carry a stone for me. And Peter's like, no, okay. And he's like picking this up, and so he picks up like a teeny pebble. Like he's like, I'm not falling for that one again. And so he picks up a teeny pebble, and they head to the next town, and everyone's starving by this point. And then Jesus says, all right, everyone, take out your stones. And then he takes them out. He's like, there's your lunch. He turns them all to bread. And then Peter's like, oh, Jesus, what about the other stone? And then Jesus looks at him and says, who are you carrying the stone for? And I think that's how a lot of us are. We are willing to carry the heavy stone if we can see the reward. And so what happens for a lot of us is that Jesus calls us to carry the stone, unclog the toilet, clean up some trash, serve in children's ministry, whatever the thing is, right? Whatever the thing is. And I think at the end of that, we're looking for someone to say, woo! And I'm not saying that praise is bad. We all need encouragement. That's actually an emotional need that the church is meant to give, is to encourage one another. But when the whole basis of your life revolves around a codependency upon that encouragement, I'm not going to serve unless I get encouraged, or I'm going to quit, or I'm going to get burnt out if I don't have another person telling me, then who are you doing the servanthood stuff for? Is it for Jesus, or is it for you? And so I love the way you brought that up, pride being one.
There's a phrase in law enforcement that I learned in the academy. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, but it's called ego is not your amigo. And so
I like that.
I wish I would have known that before.
Ego. We need to adopt that. Melanie, write that down.
But
ego is not your amigo. There you go. I like that. Okay, so let's talk about, so pride is one of the barriers. What else is not a barrier? Or what else is a barrier?
Is a barrier? Yeah. I think people view it as a burden to be here for 2 services sometimes.
Okay, a burden. All right.
The amount of time that would take.
Yeah. Yeah, because they've got a lot of napping and lunch to do, or they have parenting to do, or they have things to do.
Football to watch.
Football to watch. There's a lot of stuff going on.
There's games on at 9 a.m.
There
now
are.
in Europe.
Oh my gosh.
That's right. So how do you convince somebody, Melanie, that the burden is worth it? And maybe this first, should you convince somebody? And then 2, if you were, what would you say?
I mean, there's obviously you get eternal reward in heaven. When I started serving, it was not out of that. It was, I just moved to Austin. I need friends, and that's the way to find them.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most bonding happens in suffering. So,
In
That
serving.
suffering.
and we make it like,
Well.
like serving at church is like major suffering. But
No, it's actually, like, it can be a lot of fun, and that's where, like, if you're serving and you're gifting, it probably is a lot of fun. Like, serving, for me, hospitality was, like, a ton of fun, because I got to just, like, hand people coffee, and that's, like, my love language is giving people, like, food and drink. So
Hospitality, does
Yeah.
that fall under the Connections ministry?
Oh,
it
it
does
does.
fall
Yeah,
under
yeah.
the Connections
And you really
ministry
love the
led by
Connections
Pastor
ministry.
Grayson Dzialo. Yes.
That's shameless plug.
listen, I mean, if you're awesome at your
Contact
ministry,
me if you want to get involved.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so Connections really did it for you. How did you first get plugged in and start serving here, Nicole?
It was children's ministry.
Okay, so talk to me about why children?
I don't know.
Was it like a couple?
Like-
if whoever gives a cup of cold water to one of these little ones will not lose his reward?
I wish I could say that was it. Like I said, when I was a youth, when I first came to Christ in high school, I served in children's ministry. So it's just kind of been like the theme of my serving, like since I became a Christian. And when I started going here, I like one of the first Sundays was like Adrian on stage, like saying how much you needed help in children's ministry. And so I was just like, okay, well, that's a great place to start then. It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying.
Why was it terrifying?
Because children are scary. Like, and not in the sense that like.
Well, and you're a person that's single. You don't have children, and so
Well, and it's not even like that the children themselves. I can handle like kids not behaving well. Like I've done that before. It's the impact that you have on them. Like
what do you
that
mean?
is what freaks me out. Because like you're teaching these kids. You're an example of Christ to these kids, and you have a really big impact on your life. Like probably a lot bigger than you realize.
Right.
Because they're just like soaking everything up.
Yeah, they're going to determine, will they go to church as an adult because I loved it as a kid?
Because of their children's ministry experience.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's so true. And I felt that, I mean, I still feel that on a really deep level. I mean, I serve toddlers and they're 2-year-olds, and you think like, oh, they don't know what's going on. No, they do.
Yeah, and if you're
They
angry about the way
absolutely
the
do.
culture is going, then invest in the next generation in children's ministry,
Oh, for
because
sure.
it'll be transformative, because at least they'll have a positive image of the church
Absolutely.
imprinted onto their souls. All right, well, Grace, what about when people say, I'm too busy to serve?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about like time.
Yeah.
So you could say, so first of all, everybody has a lot of stuff going on in their life. They
Right.
have kids. Like I know we have 4 kids, and I have like 2 jobs and my wife's working, and there's always something else you could be doing.
Right.
Whenever you're doing something else. But I think the concept of what you do with your time is really important. If you were to kind of break down your time, I think the first thing that we say is, oh, we don't have time to do this. But if you actually like look at your time and budget your time, you'll find time, right? You'll find like, hey, I do this for an hour, I do this for an hour, and there's just time wasted throughout the day. And so I think for the most part, even for my situation, I don't think time is the issue, right? I think it's where your priorities, what your values, and you're gonna do the things that you want to do. Right. You really have to ask the question: Do I value servanthood? Do I value being a servant? Do I value serving at the church? Do I value those things? Because if you do, it's going to bring you joy, and you're gonna like it. You're gonna do it because it's something that you want to do.
Let's talk about things in general that people make time for. That aren't, I don't want to say thumbs down on like hobbies or fun things. I'm not saying that, but you make time for stuff you want to do. I make time to go work out. Like I care about being healthy and those kind of things, and I have to figure out. For me, that I have to leave at 5:30 in the morning to go work out and get it done back in the house to help Adrian get the kids out the door at 6:30. So that is something that I've had to be intentional about and sacrifice something, aka sleep. So what else? What else are things that people like enjoy that they make time for? Or what about cooking? Don't you bake things?
I do bake things. Not as much anymore. 'Cause I spend all my time
No,
here.
that's good. But okay, no, this is a good point though, because was there ever a time that you just baked just for you?
No, the problem with baking is it makes so much stuff, and if you eat an entire cake by yourself, that's just really not a good idea.
And okay, fair enough. But I mean, but when you give it to somebody else,
yes.
that's something for you, right?
Yes. Yeah, I went through like a whole like existential crisis about this a couple years ago, where I would like bring cookies to everything, and I was like, am I doing this because I want people to tell me how good I am, or am I doing this because I actually like want to give people cookies because I love them? And I never really landed on a good answer for that.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. What are some other things? Just things in general that people love to do that they're not necessarily bad things, but that they have to carve out time to do them.
TV shows.
TV shows.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, like people stream a lot of shows.
Yeah,
okay.
that's true.
And listen, I'm not saying thumbs down on shows, but I mean, how many times have you been like, just one more, and then like the clock ticks down 10, 9, 8, and you're like, I couldn't find the remote time, and the new show started, so I had to watch it. Like, have you ever done that?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I think there's a part of us that we let things sort of creep into our time, so why not be intentional about putting your time towards the most valuable thing?
Yeah.
When you let things creep into your time, it all comes together. So it's not like, oh, hey, I watched a show. Let's say Sunday morning.
Right.
Let's say I'm serving Sunday morning, okay, and I'm supposed to be here at 7:30, right, or something like that. Let's say I decided to watch a show on Saturday night at like 9, and then I did the countdown, watched another one, and the next thing you know, it's 12:30. I watched 4 shows.
Right.
That bleeds in. This is kind of basic, right? It's kind of silly to even talk about it, but it does. I think we kind of isolate these things. Say, oh, it's just a show.
Right.
No, it bleeds into
Everything.
your investment the next day, right? You wake up, you're groggy. You wake up, you don't want to be there, and you kind of are now looking at servanthood or serving at a church as almost like this sacrifice, and you're now not in the right headspace, or you're tired. You're not tired because of the serving.
Right.
You're tired because of what you chose to do the night before, or how you chose to invest your time before coming to the church and giving of your time
Grayson,
sacrificially.
in that vein, talk to me about burnout, because a lot of people say like, listen, I served at the last church or served at this church, and I just can't serve anymore because I'm burnt out. What do you think that's usually due to?
Yeah, I think service should be life-giving, not life-taking. I don't think there's anything about giving of your time and coming and engaging with God's people that should be life-taking.
Right.
Of you. I think everything else that you have in your life it tends to cause the burnout. I think that coming to church should recharge you, not suck the life out of you.
Right.
If it is sucking the life out of you, then you really need to kind of take a look at maybe your relationship with Christ, how you view the church, how you how you view servanthood, is serving a value of yours, all those types of things. But when it comes to burnout, I would look at everything else
Right.
before you look at the church.
Talk to that, because I think what happens is a lot of times people say, listen, I have got a lot of stuff going on. I have, on Monday, I have XYZ. On Tuesday, I have XYZ. On Wednesday, I have my community group. And on Thursday, I have another thing. And on Friday, I mean, like, Pastor, what do you want me to do? I'm giving all my time to everything. I mean, and I'm fried. I like, and so what do you say to that person? Because I think that's usually like, and they would say like, Sunday's my time, you know, like, and I appreciate the need for Sabbath. I just feel like you're putting a value on stuff that maybe the culture has forced you into, as opposed to it being your actual value.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if someone said, hey, I'm burnt out, and I've been there before. I think when we moved into this building where we're at currently, there was a month. I sat down with Megan. I said, hey, we have a month to move in. And it was like December something. And I was like, hey, I got a month. Everything's a mess. We got to paint the whole place. And we got to hang screens. I'm going to need to just not have any expectations here at home.
Right.
For a month. Can we agree to that? And she said, yeah. It was really weird. But I was like, well, okay. She was on board. Like, 15 days into that month, I was always here. I was here until like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was starting to experience just burnout of trying to get this place ready. And I was completely casting aside my family and not doing any responsibilities there so that I could focus on this. And it caused just burnout for me. So I had my values all messed up, right? I think the first thing I would say to someone that has burnout is like, hey, what are your values?
Right.
Like what are the things that God has called you to, and what do you feel like how God's leading your life? You need to start there, and then budget your time around your values. I think we tend to we budget our time around the things that we want to do, and a lot of times those wants aren't focused on our values or things.
Let's talk about values for a second. So I'm a person like, I'm like, gosh, Grayson, I'm burnt out. Talk to me how you'd help me assess my values.
I'd ask you. I was like, hey, what are the things that you live by?
Yeah.
Like, what do you feel God calls you to in life? I'd ask you questions, and you'd have to. My hope is that you would be able to process through that with me. I know for me, like servanthood is a value of mine.
Right.
It's not. You could say, oh, you get paid all the time. For 10 years, you've been at the church, and so you've always been paid. I came to Wells Branch for a job.
Right.
And I've never been at Wells Branch without receiving money.
Right.
So I get that. But servanthood started for me, when I was like 13.
Right.
I mean, grew up in the church, started leading worship at the church. I was at the church Sunday morning for both services, and then I would stay at the church until 6 p.m., which was youth, where I led worship for the youth group. And so I'd practice at 4 p.m., and then we'd start the youth ministry stuff. And so servanthood to me was something that was ingrained in me, but it was also life-giving for me. It's where my family was, where I felt God calling me to. And so that's a value of mine. So I budget my time around, hey, what does it look like for me to serve? And then I kind of do things around that.
Yeah.
So
what do you think is conflicting with servanthood? And because I think that we're going to have, and this is, I love Grayson speaking to this, but I'd love all of us to speak to this. Like, what do you think conflicts with the value of servanthood? What would that be?
I think some of it is wanting to be served, kind of like you were talking about on Sunday with the Google reviews. You show up thinking, I'm here for good service.
Right.
And we do put on a pretty good service. So that's great. That's awesome. And I think part of it is that burnout and just wanting to, like, I need some me time.
So is that a comfort thing? I think
so.
Is that I value my comfort?
I think so.
Maybe is that, do you think?
But where are you getting your comfort from?
Well,
Nice.
like where do you find your rest?
Yeah.
Like I think that this is going back to the burnout thing, but I think like a lot of people feel burnout because they're like resting in binge watching TV shows
Right.
or social media when really your rest comes from the Lord and being in God's word. And I'm saying that from personal experience because recently had this problem. And Chris, you told me like the reason you feel this way is because you're not spending time with Jesus. And I was like, oh shoot. Oh, Chris, you're right. And I was that person. I was doing things like every night. And working here, and I was at church for like half the day on Sunday, and I was like, what the heck is going on? My life is falling apart. And it's because I wasn't resting in Jesus. I wasn't spending time with him. And I think when we we try to pick the things that we think that we want, the like fun things, you know, like I know lots of young adults will prioritize, they'll go to a concert really
Right.
late on Saturday and like, ooh, I went to that concert. I can't get up late early on Sunday to serve, you
Right.
know? And it's just like, guys.
Yeah, no, it's good. So, and I think what Grayson does a really good job is help people identify what they actually value and how it actually
Yeah.
conflicts what they really do value. Grayson, how do you do that with people? And I'm just thinking from a discipleship standpoint, like, so a group's meeting together and they're like, all right, guys, talk to me about where you're serving. And everyone's like, that's, oof.
I think you got to help people be like real with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of us tend to like to say that we have certain values in our life, but we really don't.
Right.
And you really start with looking at your time.
Right.
For me, like you look at where you're investing, and oftentimes if it doesn't, that's what you value. So
Right.
if it doesn't line up with the things that you say you value, if that makes sense,
Mm-hmm.
like then that's not what you value.
Right.
So it's kind of really easy to see what someone values. You know, you talk about this with money, right? You know,
Right.
where your money goes, your heart is,
Yep.
whatever. Like it's the same thing like with your time. If you're not prioritizing church, like the example you said, go to a concert. If you go to a concert Saturday night, then essentially what you're saying is, hey, I value the concert over like serving the church, right?
Yeah.
And for you to say, no, I didn't value the concert would be weird, right? Because you made the choice to go to the concert and then it affected your ability to serve, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think looking at your time, looking at your calendar, pretty basic things like that, and then encouraging someone to be real and honest, and then helping them kind of say, hey, actually, this is what you're doing. So for you to say that, hey, I value this other thing, you're not making any time for that. So it's not something you could value. So how do you get it to the point to where you value it? You have to actually spend time doing it.
Right. We just had Liz Mitchell, a surprised super guest. She is going to be our deacon of care, and I'm so grateful that you're here. And can you talk to me about, and you have to get really close to that mic because it's like you have to make out with the mic for everyone to hear you. But talk to me about how you've been serving in a really high capacity for a long time, not getting paid as a deacon of our church, and you've faced the burden of caring for people who are needy and don't necessarily thank you properly, and you've served without getting burnt out. So talk to me about how you, as an unpaid volunteer deacon of our church, how have you and why have you given so much of your time to serve the Lord in that way?
I would say that
Even closer to the mic.
even closer.
Yes.
Is this better?
That's way better.
Well, first, you have to have a joy for it. And if you are not setting boundaries, sometimes that can be skewed.
What do you mean by boundaries?
Knowing when to say no, because you do need to set time for yourself to be spiritually fulfilled. And if you're not doing that because you're serving so much, then you're not filling yourself back up.
Right.
Which then
I think you're bringing up a great point because I think
Yeah.
there's some people that serve. They're filling an idolatrous heart of approval or of like, I need people to, give me a praise. See me.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, there's the people that have the idolatry of comfort and they don't want to serve at all. And so so I think you're speaking to those that are like overindulgent in needing to be seen to serve.
Yes. So how do you speak to those that...
No, so you're talking about
continue
boundaries.
on
Keep
that.
going on this
Okay.
boundaries idea.
Well, if you're not fulfilling yourself, if you're not filling yourself back up with the Spirit, and all you're doing is giving, at a point you run out of the giving, and
Right.
then it becomes an obligation,
Right.
and then that can turn into anger or
Right.
resentment.
And
or,
why?
I have to do this because you're not filling yourself back up. You're not resting in the Lord.
And
You're
so
not
what
taking
happens?
that time.
What have you seen people like? So they're burnt out, and what's their usual vent for that? Because what we're wanting is there to vent to the Lord and say, "Hey, Lord, I'm spending time with you," and for them to kind of feel, good, well done, my good and faithful servant. But it probably goes a lot of times horizontal, and a sense of pride comes out, and it's like, look what all I've done around here, and nobody cares.
Right. Well, yes, pride is a big one. Having pride in what you do is one thing, but
Right.
having pride because you desire to have that be seen part of the issue, can turn very sinful.
Right.
And it can turn into resentment towards others.
Yeah.
Because maybe they see others enjoying serving, and they're not serving in a joyful way. It can bring out emotions towards others where it becomes competitive. Oh, I'm going to do more and more and more because I see this other person doing more and more. So it can really lead down a very sinful path.
Yeah.
Just in that within your community can cause issues.
All right, Grayson,
with each other.
No, that's huge. So let's talk about sometimes when people are serving outside their gifting, and that's great for a season because you're doing what God's called you to do, serve the church. But Grayson, talk to us twofold. One, of just serving to kind of get in the game, but then also finding where God's calling you. I think you mentioned that before of like, finding where you're called. So talk to me about the two prongs of like, I know I'm supposed to serve, but how do I serve within the way that God's gifted me?
Yeah, I think when you first come to a church, it's really great to get plugged in somewhere, so you have a community. An easy way to do that is to serve, is to find a ministry that you enjoy, that you can get involved in, or just a ministry that needs help. That's a really good thing to do, just like right off the bat.
Find the need.
Find the
Hey,
need
listen,
and
I'll plug the dike here, and jump in there.
And ideally, if that's something that you enjoy, like you enjoy kids, children's ministry, or if hey, connections, welcome team. If you guys email me, would love your help with welcome
Shameless
team.
plug number 2.
But if you're here, you got to use it. But anyways, like if you find a spot that you kind of click with and connect with, I would say jump in.
Right.
But then when you start asking the question like, what is God calling me to? I think a lot of time in Scripture, you see a lot of different stories where God calls people to do a lot of different things that they don't enjoy, that they don't want to do. I mean, Jesus didn't want to die on the cross. A bunch of people just didn't want to do things, right? But they were obedient to God's calling, and so I think the obedience to God's calling is really important. Even if it's serving in a ministry or serving the church in a way that you don't want to. Like for me, I didn't want to clean the toilet.
Right.
I had to clean the toilet.
Right.
I don't know if you're here for that story, but
Might have to review it so she hears it.
but I think when you're
Tell me
operating in God's calling, there's no better place to be.
Yeah.
And so really, it's not really just what I want to do within the church. It's what does the church need of me, and then what is
a good
God
point.
calling me to? And honestly, in my life, God's called me to a lot of things that are difficult and hard. And things to step out into that are risky.
Yeah.
And when I look at my life, I go, man, sometimes I struggle with the calling that I'm in, only because I want other things, right?
Yeah.
I want to do things that are more fun, or I want to do things that are not as hard, or I want to do things that get me more money, or like there are different things in my life that, like, man, I wish God called me to like $1 million. Right? That'd be awesome. But for some reason, He hasn't called me that, and it's probably because I have this desire for that, right? So, but no, I think operating, especially in church, in where God's calling you, is kind of the pro play. Not just what you want to do.
So there's one of the things that we try to emphasize here at our church is worship one, serve one. I think sometimes people have asked me, Chris, why do we have 2 services? I mean, wouldn't it be way easier and it'd be really cool just to fill the place up, and that way you have 2 or you have 1 service and everyone would get to know each other? And I said, the problem with that, here's the problem with that, is that you don't allow people to worship, because there's got to be somebody who's serving in children's ministry. All right, so if we're going to heighten the level of serving our children, we should have 2 services. And so that's what the idea is. Like, I want everyone to worship one and serve one. And I think that becomes a powerful understanding of that. There should be a sense of Mary and Martha. I'm going to sit at the feet of Jesus. I'm here to learn, but that doesn't neglect or negate Martha. We need somebody's got to, go clean the toilet. Somebody's got to, if we're going to be a hospitable environment for lost people or people who are far from God, they come here and they don't know Jesus from a hole in the wall, and they're so loved and served because Jesus said that He didn't come to be served, but to serve, and they see the church emulate that. They're like, wow, I want that. And then it allows them to jump in as Christians go, this is what we do. And so what I think is challenging, and this is not like a thumbs down on vacations, but you brought this up at some point, Grace, and I thought it was just really profound a while ago, that when people like take vacation or people leave, usually they're going to leave on a weekend, right? Like that's sort of because what's priority is work. And then what Grayson said once, and I'm not sure if you still hold it. I won't pin you down on it. But you said, don't go out of town on the weekends. Shouldn't the biggest priority be to serve God and His church and the gathering, especially when there are people, and they would think they come here every week, but there's a mother-in-law has a thing and they're going to go to that, or there's a vacation trip that came up and so they're there, and so they make it to church 12 times a year. But there's a lot of things that happen on Sundays on a day that designed for us corporate worship. So speak to one of the times you said, why don't you not go out of town on a weekend? And then I guess what you're saying is go out of town during the week. And
I mean, it goes back to being realistic with what you value.
Right.
So if you value Sunday morning worship, if you value serving, if you value supporting your church in that way, well, then you're going to prioritize your time around that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not going to schedule vacations or do things that takes you away from that. Now, I'm not saying that you should never do that.
Right.
Everybody is different. Follow God's calling in your life.
Exactly.
Yada, yada, yada. Like, it's not a blanket statement. But I am saying if you are finding yourself gone a lot on Sundays and scheduling all your vacations on the weekends to where you're not corporately worshiping together, well, then you need to assess whether or not you really value Sunday and corporate worship and serving. So, like, that's just something you have to be real with. And then if you're like, man, I do value that. I want to show with my actions that I value that more. Well, then a way to do that is say, hey, you know what? I'm going to sacrifice my vacation time, right? The time that I've accrued for this purpose.
Right.
And I'm going to take my vacation Wednesday through Friday.
Because I feel like a lot of people, and just to be honest, I feel like a lot of people don't actually spend or use all their vacation time. I think a lot of it just goes unused.
No.
And so why not use it? And let's just say, who are you going to cheat? Am I going to cheat my work that I'm going to eventually retire from, quit the job, not be there for the rest of my life? Or am I going to cheat the church that is the ambassadorial, like, representation of the kingdom of God on earth? It's just sort of a wild perspective that I don't think anybody has ever really given any thought to, because who thinks like that? That's so countercultural. And so I'm just going to, like, Liz, as a volunteer, as a person that's here not because you're getting paid, but as a person that just loves the kingdom of God and you understand ambassadorial representation of Jesus, like, talk to me when we bring up that idea of, like, cheat your work, not the church. Like, what is that? Does that bring? There's any resistance that brings up in you?
No, not for me. I do work for the state, so having time off is easy for me. So I could see how others who are hourly struggle with that.
Right.
But for me, I use my paid time off for all kinds of stuff, like the women's retreat. I took a half day off and we loaded up stuff and we took it and helped set up. I'm working today, but I'm here.
Right.
And I always pray to God every morning, give me the time, show me where I can fit in ministry while I'm working.
Wow, that's
and
powerful.
He always shows me. He always gives me that break. He gives me that lunchtime. And I think I find comfort in that, in knowing that I do have the PTO that I can lean on, but I also have God showing me where I can use that time for ministry.
So there is, I think, sometimes the legitimate excuse is that it's very difficult if you are a parent of small children to worship one, serve one on a Sunday. So what are some ways that you could be involved in the lifeblood of the church, and you can listen, because I get it. I've got 4 small children, and one of the ways that my mother-in-law serves the church is she takes 3 of my kids home and for second service, so that the children's ministry doesn't have to deal with my kids who are sick of. They don't want to do the same thing twice, which they should, because they should love Jesus. But they're not there yet at 3, 5, and 7. Right. Although my oldest child, he does do both services. But talk to me about what are some ways at our church specifically that you could be involved in serving if you can worship one on Sunday and your serve one is throughout the week?
I can give a really good example, children's ministry. And this is something, just being a volunteer in children's ministry, if you have children, you could come alongside your children and serve with them in their class for the second or first service.
Beautiful.
So you could still allow them to have whatever service you're worshiping in, they're worshiping in, and then show them what serving looks like by
Nice.
serving with them, would be my biggest suggestion.
I think the Bowers do that as a family
they
really
do.
well. It's
They
really
do.
exciting to watch
Yeah.
them.
And it's great to see that family connection in a ministry that is in need.
Right.
So that's one thing.
Let's just take
that-
single
that
moms,
point-
for example. That's
yeah.
usually a difficult spot, and they've got kids, and it's they're wrestling and for them to kind of put their kids through 2 services when they've been in childcare all week anyway. Like, talk to me about any way that they can. Is there a way they can be involved with the care ministry? I know that we have a letter writing team. We have an evangelism team. There is an event setup team. We always need things throughout the week, and so it's not like that. But I'd love for you to speak about. This is your plug for care, by the way.
Well, care ministry is very much an as-needed kind of ministry, and our mom care is huge. So if you are a single mom and you want to help out by connecting with other moms, even though they may not be single, this
Right.
would be a good opportunity just for you to reach out and say, hey, I'm here for you. Or, hey, you had a baby last month.
Right.
What can I help you with? Could I maybe watch your other kids?
Oh, wow.
And have like a kids play date or something.
Yeah.
So that's one way that single moms could come into that ministry.
Yeah, and even like one of the other ways I just think about families, like you're like, listen, putting my kids through 2 services is just too much. Like having either the mom or dad stay home with the kids and they bring all the kids to second service, or they take them home after first service. That's a big way to serve, and that allows one of the parents to be here on campus serving while the other one is doing the parenting. And so that's a way to split the roles if you are a family of 5 and you're like, how am I going to be able to function with this?
It's a really big opportunity.
Yeah.
As parents, it's huge for your kids to see that. Your kids feeling the frustration, the pain, the sacrifice as well is huge for them.
Talked about that. What
So
do you
like
mean?
when your kids get frustrated because maybe they don't want to do something.
Oh, they
right?
don't want to go to 2
Or
services.
they want to go to 2 services, or maybe you bring them in service for one
Right.
or another. Like you have the opportunity to pastor them, to lead them,
Yes.
to parent them, of telling them the why we're doing what
Right.
we're doing, not just grabbing them on Sunday morning, throwing them wherever you're going to throw them, doing your thing, and then going home,
Right.
and never addressing it. It's an opportunity for you to lead your kids and your family. And that sacrifice, it affects everybody, right? It's not like, oh, I'm serving on Sunday morning and hey, husband, take the kids. No, they're sacrificing as well so that you can do what you feel God's calling you to do, and then vice versa, right? So I think it's a really big opportunity. I know that I take Jack or Nora or my kids with me on Sunday morning sometimes, and they follow me around and help me set up and do different things.
And that's huge.
And I think that's huge for them, and they love it. It's like a one-on-one
Well, Jack's the
time
best
with me.
greeter we got. That's for sure.
Yeah,
I was gonna say connections
really
is a
great.
really
Hey,
good way to-
connections, you can bring your family and you can greet together,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
serve all at one,
Yeah.
and then you can drop them off at Children's Ministry. Just
Yeah.
contact me if you're interested.
Shameless plug number 3.
Yeah. No,
I think the
go ahead.
McCowns do this really, really well.
Yeah.
Because they have 6 kids.
6 kids.
6 kids, and they trade off. So like one week Chelsea will serve and Jace will bring the kids to church, and then the next week Jace will serve and Chelsea will bring the kids to church. And so both parents are serving, but they're like alternating. And I mean, they do it with
Yeah.
6.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, and I feel like that's important
big
for people
deal.
to sort of hear and see, is that if you think about the discipleship, again, in our culture, we outsource just about everything. So we outsource our kids to school, or we outsource our kids to daycare. We outsource our kids to a lot of things. And I'm not, listen, you got to do what God's called you to do in your environment. There's no judgment there. But the reality is now you have an opportunity to disciple your child through the really difficult thing of serving and worshiping, and really understanding that we do both. We worship one, we serve one. And so whether that you worship one on Sunday and you serve one throughout the week, or you serve on that Sunday, there's opportunities to do that. And here's the thing I want to just challenge you. Disciple makers, and really this is my challenge to you, it's hard to sort of, I see in you the ability to do more than you are doing, or I see in you this thing of you have an idolatrous heart of either comfort or idolatrous heart of approval. And so you're either over-serving or under-serving due to those two, the spectrum of idolatry that we sort of go to. And so I think as a disciple maker, it's really important for you to challenge people to really take that next step in their spiritual journey and to step up into worship one, serve one. Because some people, and I've seen this, will just serve one. They'll come, they'll serve in children's ministry, they'll go home, and I would rather you come to worship because that's priority. So if you're wondering what's the priority, the priority is worship, then serving. And so if you can kind of wrap your head around that, I want you to value worship, corporate worship, and then I want you to value serving. If it comes to which one am I going to do because of whatever the situation is, I want you to worship. But understand that there is what God is calling us to is to challenge one another, to spur one another on to worship one and serve one, and just being a part of the lifeblood of the church. All right. Any other thoughts on being a servant of Jesus and connected to his church?
Do your job.
Do your job.
To the point.
It's so life-giving too. Like, and if you're new and you want a way to meet people and get connected, like serving is really the best way to do that.
And listen, I think it's just a perfect invitation to do what Jesus said. If you want, I didn't come to be served, but to serve. So come with that mindset as opposed to I'm coming to critique the music and how loud it is and how funny the preacher is. As I'm coming to be a part of the kingdom of God expansion. I'm here at the embassy to represent God's kingdom, and I want the world to know about the Savior.
Yeah.
Well, and I would also say, to add in on that, is that you may be an answered prayer, or you may be a blessing to others who are coming.
Yeah.
So just being able to rest in that, and know that we're here together, united as a congregation or as brothers and sisters in Christ, and we're called to love each other, and that's one way we can love each other.
Yeah. Cody, any thoughts from the producer gallery over there?
No, we're all good.
All right, hey, listen, thanks for checking us out. This is Pastor Plek's podcast. If you have any questions about service, or if you're trying to figure out how you can get plugged into our church, info@wellsbranchchurch.com, or just text us at 737-231-0605. We'll leave that information in the show notes. But man, well, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and have an awesome week of worship. We'll see you next time.